America, and I'm a pirate, and I hope you guys are okay.
And what do you have on your face?
This is my iPad.
Yeah, and what's this on your head?
My hat.
Your hat, okay. All right, friends. Week 2 continues. We'll finish. We started strong. We're gonna finish strong, and then next week we'll do the quiz. I'll give you more info about that in the video. Let's get started. Okay, friends, welcome back. As always, be safe, be healthy, be with your family right now. Look out for each other. Be sure to check Google Classroom each day for new videos, announcements, etc. Not just for our class, but for all your classes. Even if it's not a class you see that day, still check in and see if anything's new. Pay close attention to the new schedule so you don't miss any class meetings. And make sure you do your attendance now through your advisory classroom rather than having to do it through all of your classrooms. The new schedule, which you should be familiar with by now: Monday is independent learning, Tuesday is Schedule A, Wednesday Schedule B. Today is going to be Thursday for you, or maybe it's Friday for you, and it's just A and B again. So you've already done the schedule a couple days, so you should be familiar with it for tomorrow. And here it is for Schedule A, periods 2 through 5, followed by tutoring and advisory in the afternoon. Schedule B, same times, periods 6, 7, 8, and 9, followed by tutoring and advisory. We're continuing our World War II unit. We're going to finish out all of the lessons today so that you're ready for the quiz next week. If you haven't finished it yet, do the makeup task number 5. Those are questions that some of which are going to be on the quiz next week, and these questions will help us determine, okay, what, if anything, do you guys need some more guidance on in terms of frequently missed questions. The second guided reading is due Friday. The third guided reading is going to be due on Wednesday, April 8th. We're going to have our quiz on Tuesday or Wednesday, which is April 7th or 8th, depending on whether you're on the A schedule or the B schedule, and that'll be through Castle Learning. When you are doing the guided readings or other Google Doc worksheets, make sure you click on Turn In. If you're doing a task where you're writing a response, a short response that's just a paragraph instead of a whole worksheet, make sure you click on View Question, which is just circled, and make sure that you also type your answer in the space that you see here. And if it's not big enough, that's fine. Just type it in another document, copy and paste it into the spot there where you can put your answer. If you don't do it that way, it's difficult to keep track of, and we've already had some assignments that were incorrectly graded because they hadn't been turned in correctly. All right, so today is going to be another 3 lessons. All 3 of these lessons relate to the U.S. in World War II. First lesson is about Pearl Harbor. The next one is about D-Day, and the last one is about dropping the atomic bomb. The aims are going to be as such. Okay, let's go into the first one here. Aim number 7 for the unit is about isolationism and about the attack at Pearl Harbor that got the United States involved in the war. So our warm-up question is based off of this cartoon that you see here. It says the political cartoon to the right portrays the concept of isolationism. Now, if you look at the word isolationism, there's a root in there, isolate, or isolation, and the root of that would be isolate. So this is showing us isolationism. We need to figure out, okay, what does this mean based on the cartoon? Here's a little bit of a bigger view. So think about it. What does this mean? Think about the skills that you practice with labels, analogy, symbols, etc. Okay. So message. The bed is labeled Europe, and there are 5 people laying in that bed, and they don't look like they're doing so well. And there are labels on the bed. They say things like Stalin itch, Hitleritis, Blitzpox, Nazi fever, fascist fever. And it looks like, based on those labels, in the cartoon, Europe has many illnesses. These aren't actual illnesses. The illnesses are an analogy for problems such as Hitler, fascism, Nazis, etc., that Europe was dealing with during World War II. And the US is sitting or laying down over there in another bed. So there's the separation of the continent of Europe, continent of North America, where the US is. And the US is not getting involved. They're saying, what a lucky thing, we've got separate beds. They're not getting involved. They are isolating themselves from the problems of Europe, such as the big problem was World War II. So the United States is not getting involved in World War II. They are staying isolated. So isolationism basically means avoiding political or military involvement with other countries, which is what the United States was doing. Countries like Germany, and we'll talk about Japan today, were practicing expansionism. So the root in there is expansion. The root of that is expand, increasing a country's size by expanding its territory, which we've already talked about Germany doing that. And today we're going to look at Japan doing the same thing. You also need to know this word infamy, because Pearl Harbor has been referred to often as a day of infamy, which means known for having done bad things. If it's a person, like Hitler would be known for his infamy, the bad things he did, or being known for being evil, which I think also fits with Hitler. So in the case of a person, it means they've done bad things or they're evil. In the case of an event, it means the event was very bad or very evil. So we might say, for example, the Holocaust is an example of infamy, something that's known for being really, really bad or evil. All right, so we're going to transition to, okay, what does this have to do with Japan? So when the Great Depression struck in 1929, many Japanese blamed the government. This is similar to the blank republic. What word goes there? What other country had people blame the government for economic problems? It was the Weimar Republic in Germany. That was the government in charge of Germany before Hitler. The Weimar Republic experienced hyperinflation, which means the rapid decrease in value of money. So those are the problems that were going into Germany, and Japan had similar problems. Military leaders gained support and won control by promising to fix the problems by expanding the country. So Hitler also promised this to the people of Germany, right? And the Japanese planned a Pacific Empire that included a conquered China, so expanding to include China. The empire would provide Japan with raw materials. So this is an example of imperialism, getting more raw materials because they had industrialized and needed those materials for their factories. It would also give Japan room for its rising population. So going back to our comparison with Germany, in Germany, room for their rising population was called, it literally translates to like living room, right? And we said in German, it's called Lebensraum, which means living space, more room for the people of Germany to live in. All right, so back to Japan. This is a map of the Pacific Ocean. You can see the United States over there on the right-hand side, and you can see Asia over here on the left-hand side. Here's Japan. Japan is that chain of islands that have been labeled right now. And Japan was it increased its size by expanding its territory. Its territory includes everything labeled red. I'll put it in a big circle. All of that. So that small chain of islands took a lot of land in China and a lot of islands throughout Southeast Asia. and they had already taken Korea before this. You'll remember the invasion of Nanjing, which we talked about previously. That's also part of their expansion of their territory. Now, the Japanese admiral said that the U.S. naval fleet, meaning the boats, the battleships in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor, was a dagger pointed at Japan's throat. So let's label this. Again, here's Japan. Here's the United States. There's an ocean dividing them, very large ocean. But near the middle is Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Now, why would it be considered a dagger pointed at Japan's throat? Right? So it's closer to Japan than the mainland of the United States. And at Pearl Harbor, there were many battleships as well as an airfield. In fact, I think there was a couple of airfields located around the area. So those were seen as threats by Japan because those things were closer to them than the mainland United States. And so maybe they thought, oh, with all the things we're doing, maybe the United States will try to attack us. We're already involved in this war, World War II. Maybe they'll get involved. So we want to do something to get them by surprise. So Japan hoped to catch the United States by surprise. So early in the morning, on December 7th, American sailors at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii awoke to the roar of explosives. And you can see in this photo, if you look closely, there's an explosion happening near some of those battleships. And you can, if you look really closely, you can see the airplane flying that dropped that particular bomb to cause that explosion. And this photo, in fact, was taken from another Japanese plane coming in for the surprise attack. Within 2 hours, the Japanese had sunk or damaged 19 ships that were in Pearl Harbor. More than 2,300 Americans were killed. Over 1,100 were wounded. This photo was taken inside a memorial. So if you look at this photo, this is a view from up above of the USS Arizona, which was a battleship, and built over it, the white building on top of, you can see the boat underneath the water. The white building is basically a memorial building or sort of a museum that's been built right on top of the boat. And the boat still there, still in fact is leaking oil all these years later. And the people, the soldiers who died, who drowned when this sunk, their bodies are actually still down in the boat because the government, the military has a policy of when people die in a shipwreck, they want to leave the bodies there and sort of honor that that's where they passed and not disturb the bodies at all. So I think that's an interesting, obviously it's tragic that these people die, but it's an interesting way to honor what they did or their sacrifice. Many of the airplanes were destroyed. The buildings in which the airplanes were stored were destroyed. And this is that day of infamy quote. So President Roosevelt, who was leading the U.S. during this time, declared that this was a date which will live in infamy, meaning it's a date that will be known for something bad, something evil. He requested a declaration of war on Japan as well as its allies, including Germany. And so Congress, who we asked for it, declared war on those countries, right? So here's our vocab. Pearl Harbor, it's that Navy base. It still actually is a Navy base in Hawaii. It was attacked by surprise by Japanese aircraft. It's caused significant damage. It brought the U.S. into World War II, and it ended this time period of isolationism. And that event became very, very significant to Americans at the time. And there was a lot of sort of memorial of what happened and this idea that we need to remember December 7th. That date was very, very well known by people as the day that they were attacked, the surprise attack. And it's kind of similar to 9/11 being referred to by the date and the fact that, often you see stuff that says never forget, united we stand, etc. So I think those two events are similar. although you guys weren't alive for 9/11, you still call it that, and your life has been affected by it. Same thing with the attack at Pearl Harbor. All right, so that concludes the first of our aims for today. We'll talk about the task after we've gone through the aims. So, aim 9, why is the Allied invasion of Normandy, which is called D-Day, considered a major turning point in World War II? So for this one, I want you to think about, okay, imagine you are planning a surprise party for someone in your family who's very nosy. They always try to figure out if there's a surprise. Like if their birthday's coming up, they're trying to figure out so they can have a surprise party. So how would you make sure that the party actually stays a surprise? How will you make sure that the person maybe is not home while you set up the party? So here's some possible responses that students have said in the past. Distract the birthday person by taking them out while someone else gets the party set up. Maybe give them false information about a fake birthday party that is planned for a different day or location. Maybe you tell them, oh, there's a party for you, it's going to be next week, and it turns out to actually be tomorrow, so they don't expect it coming. Or maybe you tell them someone else's birthday is coming and the party is on a particular day, and a day that they need to go to. So then they show up at that location. Or maybe you give them a different location where they think it's going to be, and then it's not there and it's all set up somewhere else, and you trick them into going to the somewhere else place and not the fake location, and surprises them. Or maybe you act like you're not going to have a birthday party for them. You haven't talked about it at all. You're avoiding talking about their birthday. And then when you surprise them, it's even more of a surprise because they weren't expecting anything. Okay. So here's our vocab. So D-Day was the day of this surprise that the Allies invaded part of Nazi territory, and they did a really good job sort of faking them out so that they weren't expecting it, or at least they didn't know where it was going to come from. Okay, so day that the Allies started their invasion. It's the largest amphibious, which means going from the sea to the land, invasion in human history. It worked. They began to liberate, which means free, Europe from Nazi control. And this was a major turning point in World War II because the Nazis had basically conquered almost all of Western Europe, and that allowed them to focus entirely on the other side of the war, which is in the East, which was fighting against the Soviet Union. So here's another political cartoon, The Unexpected Target. You can see some labels here and some symbols or analogy. So the cave is labeled Russia. Obviously, at this time, that actually means the Soviet Union. In the cartoon, the bear, which again is in that cave labeled Russia, is fighting against Nazi Germany. We can tell that that's who they're fighting against because it's labeled with a swastika. And the swastika is sort of referred to as if it's a target. So Nazi Germany has left itself open to attack from behind because they're totally focused on the bear in the cave. Meanwhile, the U.S., represented by Uncle Sam, is getting ready to attack, and that is represented by this symbol of the bow and arrow, which is there. It symbolizes the weapons that the U.S. is going to use to attack Nazi Germany while they're not expecting it, while they're focused on the bear in the cave, the Soviet Union. All right, so Germany wasn't totally unprepared. What they had done so that they could leave the West less occupied by soldiers, so the soldiers could be in the East fighting the Soviet Union, they made this thing called the Atlantic Wall. It's on this map labeled in that yellowish color. So the Atlantic Wall was like a big defense system set up along all of the Atlantic Ocean so that the Allied soldiers in Great Britain could not easily invade, making it's already hard to do an amphibious invasion, but this made it even more hard. We'll look at some photos of it in a moment. So it's labeled yellow there. Great Britain is also here. It's shaded in green, and the Nazi-controlled territories are the dark gray. So you can see they had taken almost all of Western Europe. There was just a little bit of it left that did not belong to the Nazis. Here's a look at what the Atlantic Wall included. So there were a lot of gates and mines. Landmines are explosive. There were a lot of these barriers called ramps, hedgehogs, miles and miles of barbed wire. And then up above that was an actual wall that had bases where Nazi soldiers were in the bases, in these towers with very, very, very large guns that they could use to shoot out into the water from at a very far distance, so that even as boats were approaching, they could be shot down by the Nazis in these bunkers, towers, etc. Let's look at what these images of the Atlantic Wall show us. So these are barriers that are being put up. So as a boat is approaching, if there's water, it's going to be very, very difficult if the tide is high, difficult for a boat to pull in. Also, when the tide's low, it's difficult for an amphibious boat, which means a boat that can sort of move from the water up onto the beach. Would also be difficult for them to get very far into the beach area because of these barriers. Here's some more barriers. Here's what we mean by high tide versus low tide. So this is at low tide. Some of these obstacles are in the water, and most of them are on the beach. But when the tide goes up, they're all underwater. So a boat would not be able to navigate easily through all of those barriers. In fact, it would probably damage the boat, and it would end up sinking there. These are those guns I was talking about. Just for reference, you can see below, there's a bunch of soldiers down there. Look at how much bigger this gun is than the soldier. So this gun could be used to shoot across the channel between Great Britain and Nazi-controlled France. Here's what we mean by that. Here's Great Britain on this map. Here is German-occupied France across. So France is across this English Channel. This body of water between Great Britain and France is called the English Channel. And the Allies wanted to get across the channel in order to get to German-occupied France and take some of that territory, so then they can start taking more territory from Germany. So as they were getting ready, they had lots of military equipment, and more than 3 million troops were in Great Britain waiting to attack. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who would later go on to be a U.S. president, was in charge of the attack, and he planned to strike on the coast of Normandy, which is in northwestern France. It's a small part of France. Now, the Germans knew an attack was coming, like they knew, as if your friend, your family member from the warm-up knew that the surprise was coming, but the Germans did not know where it would be launched. One of the reasons, the Allies made fake plans and let the Germans know about some of those fake plans. So the plans were basically to fake them out to thinking that they were going to attack in all these different locations on the map. And so the Germans knew something was coming, but they didn't know where to expect it. They also created a fake army, an army that was not real, but they referred to it, so the Germans thought that there were more people. It was called the First Army Group. So this made the Germans think, oh, there's a lot more soldiers coming. We need to be ready everywhere. All these fake planned areas, which they didn't know were fake, but they knew about them. All those areas might be where the attack is coming with this fake army. They even made a headquarters for this fake, this is for a different fake army actually. The British also had a fake army, and this castle was the fake headquarters of this fake army. Take a look at this photo. What is wrong with this tank? Take a look at it closely. Can you figure it out? Here's what's wrong with it. It was a fake tank. So it's an inflatable tank, big, big, big balloon of a tank that was used to distract Germany, to make them think, oh, look, all the tanks are being moved to this location, but they were fake tanks. So they didn't know, they couldn't see, they weren't close enough to see that it was fake. They didn't know that that's not where the attack is coming. They also made fake airplanes to make the Germans think that the attacks were going to come from somewhere else. They had fake paratroopers, what are called paradummies, that were dropped in from airplanes with a parachute, and they weren't real. So they dropped a bunch of them in other places where the real paratroopers were not jumping in, and the Germans didn't know which ones were real or fake until they got close enough to the ground and they landed. So they wasted resources trying to go to these places where there were fake dummies. They even had an actor disguise themselves as the British general. The actor is on the left and the general is on the right. And they look similar enough that they could send the actor to other places and make the Germans think, oh, that's where the attack is going to come from because that's where the general is and he's there to be in charge of things, when it actually was the actor there. So they started the invasion. It's the largest, as I said before, largest amphibious attack in history. They went across the channel on the right day at the right time, and they landed on the beach with these amphibious vehicles that basically were boats that could sort of pull up onto the beach or close to the beach, flip down the door, and the soldiers would just run out. And then the boat would go back and get more people, and they just kept doing that all day. This was the biggest attack. It was also a very deadly attack. 2,700 men died on the beaches that day, just among the U.S. forces. That doesn't include France, who had troops over in Great Britain. It doesn't include Great Britain. So that's a lot of people to die on one day for one invasion. But despite heavy losses, the Allies took the beaches. They began to set up there basically as a way to move further into France, German-occupied France, and you can see all of these boats in the background, rows and rows of boats, and they used this to bring in more troops. More than 1 million troops arrived within a month after D-Day. So they now had 1 million troops. Here's the little piece that they took. You can see Normandy, that little peninsula sticking out of France. They took that from Germany, and then they used that to move east. Eventually, they got to Paris. And in Paris, once they took Paris, the people came out to welcome them, to thank them. It was very, very exciting because they had been controlled by the Germans for 4 years. Remember this photo that Hitler took at Paris in front of the Eiffel Tower, right? This is significant, showing that Germany had taken France. And this photo, I think, is also significant because it's showing how the Allies, including American soldiers, had taken France back, taken the Eiffel Tower back for Germany. And they continue, from Germany for France. And so that concludes this particular aim. So the Allies end up taking France back, and they continue to move to the east and eventually take all of Germany back, which we talked about in the previous video. We're going to look at dropping the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which are the two cities that were bombed by an atomic bomb, which was incredibly destructive. Okay, so here's our warm-up. Do you think that the loss of one life, one person sacrificing themselves, is worth the possibility of saving others' lives? Why or why not? You can even think about right now the situation, people who are putting themselves at risk to work in the medical field, work in hospitals, right? Care to people who have the coronavirus. So it's similar to that, right? One life might be lost, but there's the possibility that they're putting others at lives. They're saving others' lives. So usually students, when they're looking at this scenario, they're kind of like, oh yeah, it is. If they know that they're sacrificing themselves. But we're going to add some more specific numbers to this. Do you think that the loss of 250,000 lives is worth the possibility of saving 1 million lives? And we're going to add on to this the 250 people who die did not choose to. They're not putting themselves out there and taking the risk as a volunteer. It just happens to them. But it possibly saves 4 times as many lives, possibly saving 1 million lives. But on the other side, we don't know if those 1 million lives actually will be lost if the 250,000 don't die. It says possibility, right? So you've got to weigh that idea. And that's what you're going to be doing for this, the task at the end of this lesson. You're going to be looking at, okay, 250,000 people died to possibly save 1 million lives. But we're not sure if 1 million lives would have been lost. Here's our vocab. So the bombs that were used to end World War II were atomic bombs, also referred to as nuclear bombs now. Powerful weapons that use nuclear reactions. They are incredibly powerful. It has grown even more powerful now, which we'll talk about in our next unit when we get to the Cold War, just how powerful these bombs are. The bombs have only been used twice in war. So with all the nuclear weapons we have, only 2 times have any actually been used in war. All the other nuclear explosions that have occurred have been tests of nuclear weapons, which now, with the exception of North Korea, countries do not even test their nuclear weapons because they're so powerful. Both times that the bombs were used in war was when the US used them against Japan to end World War II. So why did they do this? So first, in the war in the Pacific Ocean, which is where Japan and the US were fighting, 58,000 Americans had already died in the Pacific fighting. So it was about 4 years that this had gone on. Some military experts estimated that if they tried to do like a D-Day type of invasion of Japan, up to 1 million Americans might be killed in that invasion and the battle that would have continued from there, trying to take all of Japan. So why do they think this? Well, in one place that they had fought Japan, you can see this island is completely destroyed. The Allies had to bomb everything to defeat Japan on this island that they controlled. The reason for this is that you should remember this idea, Bushido, or Way of the Warrior, from 9th grade when you were learning about Japan and the samurais. It's this fight to the death idea that you never give up. You always fight till the death, to the very end. And some historians say this is why Japan was so resistant to surrendering. And if the Allies had tried to invade Japan, it would have had to end up looking like this also, and it would have cost countless lives, okay? Because the Japanese did not want to give up. They wanted to die before they gave up. It was dishonorable to give up, right? And we also talked about this in the first lesson of the day. Remember December 7th, many people felt also that Japan deserved to have this type of destruction on them because they had started it at Pearl Harbor, and that because of the Day of Infamy, the evil, the bad things that happened on the day of Pearl Harbor, that there's justification in getting back at them by bombing them very, very heavily, even resorting to using these new atomic bomb weapons. Additionally, the Allies had already advanced through a lot of territory, a lot of islands that Japan had held. You can see it sort of the dark blue lines. They're basically going from one island to another to get eventually all the way to where they could reach Japan. They warned Japan through this warning called the Potsdam Declaration. They said that they must unconditionally surrender, which means you can't ask for anything, you just give up, and then we decide what to do with you after. And they said if they don't do it, then Japan will face prompt and utter destruction. So then they flew over major cities in Japan, and they dropped these pamphlets. This is one of the pamphlets they dropped, and it was warning about these are the cities that we're going to destroy if your government leaders don't give up. So they wanted to get the citizens to put some pressure onto the government. And the other side is saying we cannot promise that only these cities will be among those attacked, right? In the background of the photo, those aren't pamphlets being dropped, those are bombs being dropped. But the pamphlet lists the cities that will be bombed by those um, bombs that you see. Those aren't atomic bombs quite yet. All right, so an example of this is they firebombed the city of Tokyo, which is a major city in Japan, and you can see these are bodies of Japanese civilians, not soldiers, but civilians, people who were not enlisted in the military, who burned to death when Tokyo was bombed. Now, back to the nuclear weapons. So there's this project called the Manhattan Project, which created the first nuclear bombs. This bomb is being tested out in the desert in Nevada. These are the actual two bombs that were used on Japan, the explosions from those. They were incredibly devastating. Look at this aerial photo of Hiroshima before the bombing, right? So you're looking down on the city. You can see the river running through the city, and you can see some buildings. Here's same view after. Everything is completely destroyed. Show it one more time. This is before the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. This is after. Here's a lower view, sort of looking across. You can see there are a couple buildings that survived, but 90% of the city of Hiroshima was destroyed. This is the second bombing, Nagasaki. You can see the before up above and the after. Everything is gone. Why these cities? Why Hiroshima and Nagasaki? These were cities that were industrial cities that were building weapons for the Japanese. And so the idea is, one, we can show Japan just how powerful these weapons are. Two, we can also destroy the places that they're making these weapons that they're using to fight against us. This is another ground photo, completely destroyed. And this is some of the physical damage. You can see that this person's shirt just evaporated from the explosion, and it left burn marks. You can see the pattern of the clothing on this person's body because of just how quick the fabric just completely burned up and just vaporized in an instant. This is another injury. Right? And then I'm going to mention a video when we get to the end of the lesson. If you watch the video, it also shows examples of people who survived but are still injured even to this very day. They survived the bombing, because they were far enough away from the explosion, but they were close enough at the same time that they got very, very damaged by the explosion. All right, so here's some numbers. Before the bombing, there were 350,000 people, including 40,000 soldiers in Hiroshima. The total death rate, including people who died from cancers that maybe killed them later on, but they got from the radiation from the bombing, 300,000 dead. The temperature of the bomb when it exploded was up to 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit, not 100 degrees, 200 degrees, not 700, 7,000, more than 7,000 degrees was the temperature. So you can see why so much was destroyed. 90% of Hiroshima was destroyed. And also interesting to point out, 45 minutes after the explosion, a black rain of highly radioactive particles started falling. So a lot of people died in the explosion, but then this black rain was basically radioactive rain. And that black rain was pouring down onto people, and they were becoming contaminated by the by the radiation. And so people who didn't die from the explosion died from the radiation either a few weeks later or even years later from getting cancer. So what does Japan do? Japan surrenders. They give up. And this is a quote from U.S. President Harry Truman. Roosevelt had passed away. Truman was his vice president who took over. He said, "We thank God that it has come to us instead of to our enemies. We pray that he may guide us to use it in his ways and for his purposes." Now, some people might say, yep, that's true. We're thankful that we got it and not our enemies. Some people might say, no, you can't be thankful for something that's so destructive and say that God is the one that will teach us how to use it and God's the one responsible for us having it, right? So those are two different perspectives on that. Here's some recommended viewing. If you, I'm going to link these onto the lesson also. You should watch the attack scene from the movie Pearl Harbor. You could watch the whole movie, but the attack scene shows just how surprised the Americans were and how destructive the attack at Pearl Harbor was. You should watch Saving Private Ryan. Again, watch the whole thing if you have time. But the beginning, not immediately the very beginning, but sort of the second scene is this invasion scene of what happened at D-Day. And it's a very, very good portrayal. A lot of soldiers who were still alive when the movie came out went and saw the movie, and they said that's how it felt. It felt a lot like what they portrayed. And you're going to see how they approached and how destructive it was for those who didn't survive. Okay, and then there's a documentary about Hiroshima and Nagasaki called White Light, Black Rain. The white light is the explosion. The black rain is that rain that fell down. Yeah, if you have time, this is the one. I'd say you got to watch this one. It's very, very moving. They interview survivors. They describe what actually happened on the ground that day. If you can't watch the whole thing, I think you should watch the first couple minutes. The introduction sort of sets the stage. There's a section called White Light, which starts at about almost the 26-minute mark. There's one called Black Rain, which is almost at the 32-minute mark. And then there's a section called Aftermath. If you watch those sections, you'll have a good understanding. If you watch the whole thing, I think you'll have an even better understanding. So there's just one task today. It's going to be based on this last lesson. It's the one that I think is the most controversial and gives you the best opportunity to make a strong argument. You're going to argue, was the United States justified in using this atomic bomb to defeat Japan and bring World War II to an end? So think about, was it the right thing to kill so many civilians and some soldiers? Did they actually save 1 million people by not having to invade Japan from the sea to the land? Or was it the wrong thing to do? Was it not justified? I'm sorry, I just said it was the wrong thing to do. Or was it the best thing to do? Kind of like when, in a previous lesson, the Allies chose not to bomb the concentration and extermination camps. They chose to focus on ending the war sooner. So is it justified for the United States to use these atomic bombs to bring World War II to an end sooner, or should they have done an invasion of Japan and not put more innocent lives at risk, but just focused on fighting the military? Also interesting to point out, when Japan surrendered, they did not know that the United States did not have any more atomic bombs. They only made 3 at that point in history. Now we have thousands, but the U.S. had used 1 in a test. They used 1 on Hiroshima, 1 on Nagasaki. So that was all the bombs they had. So that's an interesting part of the argument too. Is suppose Japan had not backed down, and they had decided, we're going to keep fighting, right? Fight to the death, fight until everyone's dead. And then the bombs would have been all used up, right? So you can consider that as well. We're going to close out today. Be safe, be healthy. Check Google Classroom every day. Even on Monday when you don't have actual classes, still check in to see what's going on. Pay attention to the new schedule. Be sure to submit your attendance through your advisory. And also, be sure to watch the videos. Thank you for watching this one. Keep it up. Keep up the hard work. You're doing great. We're going to end the lesson right here because Joaquin and I only filmed the intro video. Apologies. We'll make sure to try to have both on the next one in our next unit.